Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending Black Hat, and welcome to Into the Inbox, Novel Email Spoofing Attack Patterns. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome to the stage Caleb Sargent and Hao Wang.
Thanks, everyone, and good afternoon. Today, we'll be going over some novel email spoofing attack patterns that we've discovered over the past several months, almost actually 6 months now. And these attacks culminated in a couple of CVEs, as well as impacts well over 20 million different domains. And as the announcer said, my name is Caleb Sargent. I am a security professional, offensive security, working at PayPal. I've been in InfoSec for about a decade now. Previous to that, I was in the Marine Corps for about a decade as well. And this is my first Black Hat talk, and I look forward to sharing our research with you. And I'm here today with my colleague and manager, Hao.
Thank you, Caleb. My name is Hao Wang, Offensive Security Manager at PayPal. This is my first Black Hat talk. I started my career as a pen tester after 15 years. I'm still doing the same. We are glad to be here. Look forward to diving into the details.
And with that, we give a standard disclaimer. The ideas, content, all that is ourselves and not those of our employers at all. And with that, let's quickly go over an agenda. First, we're going to tell a quick story, and then we'll talk about some email security basics, as well as some email security basics. And then we're going to go over some attack patterns. We have 3 attack patterns that we will be sharing with you today. And then we'll talk about some next steps, and then finally, some recommendations. And with that, I have to ask you, have you ever been pranked? Actually, I should ask, has anybody in here not been pranked before? The answer is probably no. Well, if you're a friend or family of mine, you're not exempt to that at all. Last April Fool's, I guess it's 2 ago now, I took this giant cardboard cutout of a bear and set it up in my kitchen. And I don't mean like a Yogi Bear, I mean like a grizzly bear. Set it up in the middle of my kitchen, and my family, whenever they saw it the next morning, they were terrified. My daughter screamed. The dog's never been the same since. Well, this leads me into this year. So how can I one-up that? Well, I decided I wanted to see if I could make my buddy sell his house. That's right, sell his house. So how am I going to do that? Well, what does everybody despise and loathe my age besides the HOA? So he's been having some issues with the HOA, so I decided I'm going to send an email to him as the HOA telling him he needs to repaint his house. Well, in order to do this, first I need to send an email. So I do what every hacker does. I go figure out a way to send an email online. Well, there's plenty of different email marketing campaigns out there that you can just go and get an API key and then just put it in a curl request, just manually send that. And that's exactly what I did. But I wanted to test to make sure this actually works, right? We're not just going to test this live. We want to actually make sure this prank goes over really, really well. So surely I can't just send an email as anyone, right, to anyone. I'm sure there's like some security mechanisms in place for that, right? Well, I send this test email, and what do you know? We'll go over SPF, DKIM, and DMARC a little bit, but if anybody in here knows anything about email security, you'll know that these indicators show that this is a valid email. So now, I didn't really know why that worked at the time. All I did was want my friend to sell his house. So we just continued on with the prank, and I went ahead and sent out the real email. So this is the legitimate looking email that I sent out to my friend. It essentially tells him that, hey, there's a shade of black on his house that he needs to repaint, right? And I left some little indicators in here. If you look at like warm black, true black, there's some key tells in there that this is a prank email. Besides the date was September or April 1st. That's April Fool's. We sent out the email, and did he fall for it? Oh yeah, he fell for it pretty good. I messaged him later that night to see how things was going, and he was telling me that he was thinking about putting his house up for sale, and he was going to be indulging in a few beverages. Well, with that out of the way, I told him, hey, it's just a joke, no hard feelings or anything, and he didn't sell his house. We're still friends if anybody's interested. Well, nobody gets to where they are without working off of somebody else's research, and that's what Hal and I did after this whole incident. We started recapping some previous talks that we had been to, and one of them was Marcello Bitebleeder at DEF CON last year. Had a pretty good talk, actually an excellent talk, about spam channel and how to abuse SPF records. So we just kind of kept that in the back of our mind. And then the second one is Timo Longen, and this has to do with SMTP smuggling, who thought 2023 was going to be the year that SMTP smuggling was a thing. Unfortunately for you all, I have to go over email security so we all understand how this works. So I'm going to quickly recap exactly how this works. So there are three main key things. SPF, which is a sender policy framework. Don't get too wrapped around like the mail from, what all that means. Just think of this as an email address, or an IP address that is allowed to send on the behalf of an organization, something like that. And then we have DKIM, and then DKIM, this is just a signature on the email saying, yes, this is from this domain, and it's okay, we're good with it. And then finally, DMARC. DMARC is just the doorman saying, hey, yes, you can come on through because it is passed, or nope, you're going to go straight to the bin, file 13. I like pictures, so we drew you guys a pretty little picture of what that looks like. Don't worry too much about the envelope up at the top. We're more focused on this message down here at the bottom, right? So up here at SPF in the green, this is going to be our mail from SPF, which is going to be the IP address that is going to be sending. This just has to pass in order for DMARC to pass. At the bottom, we have DKIM. It says D equals a.com, but just think of this as the signature of the domain saying that you're allowed to send. Well, the key point of this is that it's an or statement, right? Only one of these two have to pass. So if you are wanting to spoof emails, you only need to get SPF to pass, or you only need to get DKIM to pass. So let's take a look at another use case. This slide looks confusing, I admit, because that's because it is. We have SPF and DKIM as pass, but DMARC is fail. And I'm sure, like Caleb, you just said that only one of the two have to pass, and your DMARC will pass. That's not entirely true because that doorman can only be looking for like a certain domain. In this case, it's c.com. So if SPF passes or DKIM passes, DMARC is not necessarily going to pass. And with that, we'll pass it over to Hal, and he'll talk about some of our research.
Thank you, Caleb. So initially, we look at a lot of vendors, including web hosting providers, domain register, and email service providers. We look at 15 of them. As a result, we found 8 of them had some sort of email spoofing issues. Later, we categorized them into 3 different attack patterns, and we will talk about every single one of them in the following sections. One of the key reasons we want to pick those vendors just because some of those are either managing or owning a lot of domains for the whole world. And this is just the pretty straightforward methodology we adapt through our research lifecycle. Basically, we came up hypothesis first. Based on that, we do investigation. And after that, we found new issues. Based on those new issues, we found additional issues. And the cycle just continues. So let's dive into the real meat here, attack pattern number 1. I would say this is the most impactful attack pattern through our research, just because millions of domains were vulnerable to this attack. So we will use a real example to walk you through step by step how this can work. Let's say the goal here is to spoof a domain called networksolution.com. And it can be other domains as well. We just want to use this one as one example. So first, we enumerate the SPF record against this domain. You may see that there are multiple SPF records, but one of them draws our attention during the research, which is spf.websitewelcome.com. Caleb and I, we never saw this domain. We have no idea about what this domain is. So after some Google search, we realized this is actually a kind of master SPF record used by a web hosting company called HostGator. Basically, the company used this to reallocate the IP address for shared hosting service without worrying about updating SPF later. I mean, that makes sense, right? So we did additional enumeration against this master SPF record. We found the associated IP range. In other words, if you somehow can send an email from any of those IPs we list here, you probably can spoof the domain, which contain this master SPF record, and the network solution is one of them. So now our question is, how can we get access to one of those IP? So the answer is, you probably can use the vendor's SMTP server. So we went ahead, we registered our own SMTP account at hostgator.com. As a result, we got our SMTP credential as well as a dedicated SMTP server. So after that, what we did, we just pinged that server directly, right? Just to verify if that IP is actually within the allowed master SPF IP range for HostGator. It looks like it's right in the range. So now that means if we can connect to this server, send the email, most likely we can pass SPF and then DMARC. So let's just put everything together. First, we use a credential we got from HostGator. We connect to the HostGator SMTP server. And then we managed to inject our spoof email, in this case, admin@networksolution.com, into both mail from and from field. As a result, SPF was passed, just because we are sending this email from the IP that's in the allowed list. And then later, DMARC was passed, just because we were able to inject our spoofing domain from the from field. And then DMARC will only verify the SPF status of this domain. So DMARC was passed as well. And we just put a simple command together. And basically, this exactly replicates what we mentioned about. As long as you have one set of HostGator credential, you can perform a similar attack during that time. And this screenshot basically shows we were able to successfully spoof the email from admin@networksolution.com into a victim inbox. If you look at the email header, SPF was passed, DMARC was passed. However, there's one thing we want to call out here. Through the whole attack pattern, there's actually nothing wrong with networksolution.com. The issue is related to the configuration of the SMTP server of HostGator. And also, HostGator owns many domains. So we were just wondering if those domains were also vulnerable to the same attack. We went ahead, we collected about 6 million domains from HostGator, and we scanned all of them. As a result, we found out about 4.1 million domains were vulnerable to this kind of email spoofing attack. Later, we performed the same attack against other vendors. GoDaddy is one of them. We collected about 6.8 million domains from their US market. Through our scan, we found out at least 30% of those domains were vulnerable to this attack. And as you know, GoDaddy owns more than 80 million domains worldwide. So just based on a data sampling approach, there should be at least 20 million domains vulnerable to this attack. However, due to our compute resource limitation, we could not finish the whole scan before this talk. This is just the picture slide, a quick recap about what we just talked about related to this attack pattern. So who is vulnerable? Large domain register, email service provider, web hosting providers could be vulnerable to this attack. We worked with US CERT, and they assigned 2 CVE to us. One is related to the user verification from the from field. The other one is related to the over-permissive SPF record. What's the impact? So through our scan, we proved that there should be at least 6 million domains vulnerable to this attack. But please keep in mind, we only scanned about 15 domains owned or managed by 2 providers. So the actual impact related to this attack is much, much more. Also, we want to call out, this attack would work with any type of mail inbox. So it doesn't have limitation about what inbox the end user is using. How do you launch this kind of attack? So first, obviously, email address is not verified through both mail from and the from field. Although this is a RFC violation, but you may be surprised, a lot of vendors are still configuring stuff in this way. And the last, you need a victim domain which configured with this over-permissive master SPF record, just like the example we showed, like a HostGator. So next, I will pass to Caleb to talk about our next attack pattern.
So attack pattern 2, this is one that will probably be pretty familiar to everyone because it's the one that we played the prank with on in the beginning of this talk. And this one may not be the most impactful, but I kind of think it's the most cool because we can spoof an email as literally anyone. And why is that? Well, we started taking a look at some of the emails that were sent out as a result of this, and we saw something called dual DKIM. So on each of these emails, there were 2 DKIM signatures, right? So I don't know if you recall earlier, but I said that it is signed, right? I didn't say how many times it can be signed. Well, in this case, it was signed twice. One with mailgun.org, who we were sending the email through, and then the second one, Purple Cloud Ops, that's the one that we actually owned. We also saw this thing called XFeedback ID. We didn't understand what it was at the time, but it looked kind of important, like some sort of unique identifier, and we were pretty certain that it was going to be important to this. So about this time, we started coordinating with US CERT in order to get the CVEs, and somebody chimed in the channel of 50+ vendors and was like, do you guys know what a feedback loop is? Because that's exactly what you're describing. So we're like, no, please tell me more. So they did. They let us know all about a feedback loop. And the idea behind this is that an email provider will give a recipient, or they will allow them to send an email that is signed by them, which in this case would be like Outlook.com, Gmail, right? And it will be signed by the originating domain. In our case, it'll be mailgun.org, right? And the reason this is important for the provider is because, or whoever's sending the email, is that they will get some sort of feedback on if their email was considered spam or not, right? So it is a feedback and a loop aptly named. Well, each one of these providers have their own way of doing this, right? And this is pretty much just saying the same thing, that, hey, it needs to be signed by whoever is sending the email, right? So there is some security in place. However, there is security in place. However, we can circumvent that because, believe it or not, a lot of these places aren't verifying that you own the domain that you're trying to send as. So you can say, I am whoever at whatever.com. They don't actually validate that. And then they're kind enough to actually sign our email with their signature, saying that this is completely valid. Well, that's fantastic and all, but let's take a look and see what this actually looks like. Once again, we have this RFC violation that says, thou shall check and make sure we know who this from field is, and that you actually own that. So here, we're going to send an email from alice@mailgun.org. And at the bottom, we have our dual DKIM, right, a.com, that we say we own. And then we have mailgun.org that we don't own, but we're using this feedback loop, so they are generously enough signing that for us, and it's an or statement, so DMARC will pass. And of course, we're going to test this out as usual, so let's spoof some emails, API key. We're going to create an API key, and in all things hacking, you generally want to identify something you can control. The one thing that we can control here is the from field, right? And then that's who we want to send an email as. In this particular case, Mailgun they're no longer vulnerable to this, but they were not checking to make sure that you weren't mailgun.org. So that's what we did. We sent out a test email, and I, like that, became admin@mailgun.org, and we see down here we have DKIM and DMARC are once again passing. So I guess like the why. Why are there so many domains that are impacted whenever we're just really spoofing the root domains? Like I said, it's dependent on a couple of things, right? We have these root domains that we can send and sign email messages as, but it's very much dependent on the email inbox that is for the receiver as well. So what does that look like? It looks like this, right? And these are some spoofing examples from Brevo. First one we'll talk about is Gmail up here, and as if there's anybody with a keen eye in here, they'll notice that this is the exact same root domain, tsendersib.com, that was in our original prank email. But this time, we're telling the world that we are test@outlook.com, and it went directly into my Gmail inbox with SPF, DKIM, and DMARC all passing. The second one is private email, and this one's my favorite because it doesn't do any of that other nonsense. It just says, hey, your DKIM passed, and you tell me you're test@outlook.com, therefore you're test@outlook.com. This is just our example, but you can spoof any domain. Think of any big domain that you want, and then this will look like it came from them. And this is the same probably for a lot of like open source email inboxes. And then finally, we have Outlook. Outlook likes to do things differently. We all know that they have their special sauce, their spam filtering and all that. And we use the same root domain of sendinblue.com. However, up in the top, it just says unverified, right? So like, what does unverified actually mean? In the bottom, it's basically saying, hey, we realize that this is not actually who you are, but we're going to put it into your inbox anyways. I don't know, just Microsoft things. So we have pattern 2 here, and this is just our recap slide if anybody wants to take a picture. But effectively, who is vulnerable? Well, anybody using the feedback loop feature and using a popular inbox such as Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo. And then this does have the associated CVE for domain authentication. What is the impact? Like I said, we can spoof emails from anyone into any of these inboxes. It's just very deterministic on exactly which inboxes they're using and how it's displayed. So there's no real display trickery here. And as far as the prerequisites, really it's just the from field is not being verified in accordance, or which the CVE points out the RFC flaw. And then finally, the DKIM signature is required by the feedback loop for that email sender. All right, here we go.
Okay, so we are going to dive into a brand new attack pattern. It's related to something called SMTP smuggling. So I'm not sure how many of you know what SMTP smuggling is. Perfect. So just for those of you who don't know this attack was first discovered by Timo Login from SecConsult Vulnerability Lab around December last year. When Caleb and I first time saw this attack, we immediately realized this could be one of the most impactful attacks of that year. So the attack is basically abusing the end of data sequence interpretation between outbound and inbound SMTP server. In other words, one email sent by outbound SMTP server can be potentially split as 2 different emails due to the parsing logic of the inbound SMTP server. And then the email spoofing can happen. So in this talk, we will not go through a lot of details about how the attack works. If you go to Timo's blog, you can see all those cool things over there. However, we do want to highlight 2 things here. First, there are still a lot of vendors' email gateways with default configuration. They are still vulnerable to this attack. Second, through our research, we further prove that the impact of this attack can be further expanded if the outbound SMTP server can be used to send multiple emails on behalf of many domains, just like the HostGator example we walked through during attack pattern number 1. So as always, we want to use a real example to walk you through how this attack may work and what the impact could be. In this case, we want to spoof an email from iowa.gov. Obviously, it can be any other domains. We just want to use this one as one example. And if you start enumerating SPF against this domain, you will find that one of the SPF record is SendGrid.net. It's another email service company. It basically uses this SPF record to send emails on behalf of their customers. If we perform further enumeration, obviously you can get all the IP range associated with this master SPF record. That means if you can send an email from any of those IP, you can potentially spoof the email for the domain that contains those master SPF record. Right? It's similar to attack pattern number 1. So how can we get access to those IP? Of course, you can just register on their website and get an SMTP credential. Then you can try to use those to access SMTP server, right? So since I'm currently living in Texas, we typically do things like in cowboy style. So I went ahead to connect to the SMTP server directly by using the registered credential. And then we inject the spoof email, in this case, admin@iowa.gov, into both mail from and the from field. Obviously, we failed, just because SendGrid is doing a good job to verify the identity of this domain. Since we don't own iowa.gov, then we cannot use this domain to send email. Totally makes sense. And then, oh, this is just, by the way, this is just a screenshot to show we failed through this first attempt. And then we switched to our SMTP smuggling trick. So the beauty of the SMTP smuggling attack is to bypass the user verification through the smuggled email. First, we just craft a SMTP command payload like this. And the special payload is called like carriage return. We highlight that in purple color here. So once we send this payload, basically, SendGrid outbound SMTP server didn't filter out any of those, which is a RFC violation, by the way. And then after the inbound SMTP server receives that, it will basically parse all the SMTP command after that payload as a separate email. And we highlight that email in purple color here. We also call that a smuggled email. Through this email, pretty much you can inject whatever domain you want. And since we are sending the email from the host SendGrid IP, so SPF was passed, and then DMARC was passed. So technically, you can land a legitimate email to the end user inbox who is using a vulnerable version of the gateway or weak configuration. So this screenshot basically shows we were able to successfully spoof admin@iowa.gov to an inbox who is using a vulnerable inbound gateway. From the header perspective, you can see SPF was passed, DMARC was passed. However, the issue is really not about iowa.gov. There's actually nothing wrong with this domain. The issue is related to both the inbound, outbound SMTP server we are using through this attack. And also, since SendGrid owns a lot of IPs, as well as other vendors and either domains, so we were just thinking if we can spoof other domains as well. So we did our scan against the 3 providers, including SendGrid. We can prove that we can spoof over 1 million domains from all of those. And a lot of those domains are very high reputation domain. They include Fortune 500 company, government agency. The root cause for this, just because their outbound SMTP server did not filter out those SMTP smuggling payloads, such as bearer, carriage return, or land fee. So this is just a quick recap about how this attack works. So who can be vulnerable? From sender perspective, basically all those outbound SMTP servers, they don't filter out the bearer, carriage return, and the land feed payload. From inbound perspective, we know Cisco email gateway is known vulnerable to this, as well as Fastmail. So what is the impact? Through our research, we found, OK, you can spoof a lot of high reputation domains. But we truly believe a lot of vendors can also be vulnerable to the same attack. So what do you need to launch this attack? If you can find the right pair of outbound and inbound SMTP server through your attack chain, I would say you can always have an opportunity to launch this. So from outbound perspective, basically they don't filter out this kind of payload. And from inbound perspective, they will just take this payload and split the email. So how do we detect this? I will call out our team member, Harrison Pomeroy. He came up with this great idea. He basically found this thing called a message ID. Basically, it's an identifier that your email server adds when you send the email. And this message ID is associated with the email server domain. So from the attack path we just talked about, right, to launch an SMTP smuggling attack, you typically need at least 2 emails. One is more like the legitimate email. The other one is the smuggled email. In most cases, the legitimate one will come from external domain. So the message ID is associated with the external domain. And the smuggled one, the spoofed email, will typically come from the internal domain. So that message ID is associated with the internal domain. So for one SMTP connection, if you see it trigger multiple emails within a short period of time, and they have different type of message ID with different domains, then that could be a strong indicator to detect this kind of attack. We found this very useful through our lab. We thought it may be worth to share with the community. With this being said, I will pass this to Caleb to talk about how we collect those data.
Thank you. So we talked about just now on this last slide about how to do detection on this. But a lot of you probably also are wondering all these numbers, right? We threw like 20 million at you, 10,000 here and there. How did we come up with those numbers? Well, we didn't just make them up. We actually went and got the data. But once we initially asked for the data, people were charging a lot of money for data, like a stupid amount of money. So a couple quotes we got initially for data sets of DNS records from last year, effectively, with associated subdomains and SPF and DNS records, as well as mail records. We wanted all this stuff. Well, it was ridiculously expensive, so we said, forget your data. We're going to build our own data, but with DMARC and SPF records. And that's what we did. And we had our third teammate, ChatGPT, write us a program just to go out there and do this. And that's exactly what we did. We ran this program, and it wasn't the fastest thing. It took me weeks and weeks to scan all of Alexa top 1 million. We did get a smaller data set, but millions and millions. And if anybody's ever done large at-scale scanning like that, you'll know that it takes some time with limited resources. And then it was another week or two of just parsing a whole bunch of JSON. Well, surely there's a better way to do this. And this is kind of a short little anecdote is after we released the blog for this talk right here, somebody on LinkedIn reached out and said, hey, did you think about doing this? And then this is actually what he described. So it was pretty cool to see like somebody independently come up with the same methodology approach that we did. So the idea is to take the ASNs and IP blocks for basically everything, match them up, right? And then do an MX record lookup and get the DNS, SPF, DMARC, all the text records, right? Take all that data and then just import it into your own Kibana and NiFi cluster. So that way, you don't have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. You have this data at your disposal. And with this data, then we went to disclosure. So the disclosure process is initially you're going to email companies, right? You're going to say, hey, there's a problem with your product, or I found this thing, you guys should probably fix it. Well, we did that a lot. We sent out dozens of emails to different companies, abuse, disclose at company.com. And for the most part, we got crickets, right? Some bin 13, file 13 sort of thing, right? And we didn't really get anything back until we got this talk accepted. And then we mentioned to them, hey, our talk was accepted. You guys want to do something about that? And quite a few of them were like, yeah, we'll get right on that now, right? So sometimes it's good to have a little bit of leverage. And that's what we did here. So this is our disclosure timeline, kind of a little bit up there, but we wanted to put everything all together all at once for you guys to see this month-long process. It did result in these 2 CVEs up here, one for domain authentication and one essentially for wildcard SPF. I know it sounds silly, but we really shouldn't be doing it. And then we did have a couple of blogs posted as well. One of them is up on the US CERT website. And in the references in the appendix of this, all of those links will be there if anybody is interested in taking a little bit more look. But I love this screenshot all the way on the far left-hand side showing 54 vendors collaboration with email issues, and we were in a channel with all of them. So that was super cool. Now for our recommendations. We're not just going to throw all this stuff out there and say, hey, everybody, we can't do anything about this. But we can. One, we need to follow the RFC first. I'm not going to go through and read every single one of these because unless anybody wants to go to sleep, this looks like good sleeping material. But through the RFCs, there's a lot of keywords that I highlighted that we should just be paying attention to, right? Like should not, users must, you may, authenticated domain. So I would take it amongst, if you are an email service provider, definitely take a look, and this will prevent email spoofing as a service. And we have SMTP smuggling here. These are some of the RFCs that are associated with that. One of them is just null characters. They have these things that are called retired characters. If you read this RFC, just don't use them, just don't allow them anymore, and there won't be any of those issues, as well as carriage return and line feeds. We need to make sure that those happen together and they aren't just spread all over the place. And once again, all of the must not, shall not, do not through the RFCs. They're there for a reason and we should be following them. And our last recap slide right here, I'll go ahead and just hit each of these bullet points. So this top one is really about us, about everyone, right? Like if you have email, your organization uses email, which is everyone, we need to make sure that our hygiene is top notch on that as well before we can even start tackling these other issues. So make sure that your own DMARC and DKIM and SPF are ensuring the authenticity of your email. And then we need to be utilizing some advanced email filtering. This is very much along with what Hal was talking about to make sure we have a way to do that, as well as making sure we're validating everything else that's put in place, right? And finally, let's adhere to those RFC standards. A couple people have already reached out to me directly whenever they saw that RFCs were going to be in this talk. So there are people that are interested in it, and it is and should be a community effort to make sure that we are all enforcing these and all contributing to them. And with that, does anybody have any questions? Oh, right here, yeah. I think this microphone should be working up here. Let's test it.
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay.
Good. So
you said that you managed to pass DMARC without passing DKIM, right? That would be like a misconfiguration of DMARC that allows them to enter the inbox only with SPF or DKIM, but it could be fixed with a correct configuration of DMARC, correct?
Yeah, is this related to the Microsoft or the Outlook slide, the one that has the DKIM fail on it, or just in general?
I think it was like the first method you guys mentioned.
Got it, yeah. So he's asking that if basically, just make sure I got this correct, DKIM, if that fails, then DMARC should also fail as well, right?
Depending on the configuration
Yes.
that is set by the company, right?
Yes, and that is all about the company and how the company has that set. And yeah, we didn't go over an in-depth list of exactly how all email security works, but yes, you're 100% correct. If DKIM fails, DMARC should also fail, but then you have to have your DMARC records set up to ensure that that goes to quarantine or the bin or wherever else.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think according to RFC, you only need either SPF or DKIM passed. Either if one of them is passed, then in most cases, DMARC will be passed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question was more about another mitigation for companies would be
Yes.
to set up DMARC correctly in spite of what the
Yeah.
problems might be with the
I can go
providers,
back,
right?
well, these are our references, a couple slides here. So that's what this top one up here is about, is it making sure our organizations
It's
are
done right.
enforcing all of those. Great question, though. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, we thank everybody. We appreciate your time, and we hope you guys all have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.